Welcome everyone to Lesson 4 of the Social Media Web App. Let's start off with the client side of the banner module. It's a rather basic passing of props to display in our banner. Probably one of the more simplest modules that we're going to be putting together. And I would say I'm going somewhat alphabetical, but I do switch it up a little bit and do some things out of order within this whole tutorial. Anyway, let's go ahead and just get this up and running here. We need to go ahead and make some JSX and build our Jumbotron. If you're not familiar with Jumbotron, that's going to be something you can pick up from Bootstrap. It's basically another word for banner. And some people might call it a hero image, based on if they have any marketing experience background. And so an interesting thing we're going to do here is we're manipulating the style. We're going to be bring that in for the background image. As opposed to changing classes or something, this is a little more inline. But sometimes it is, especially when it comes to background images, something you'll need to do. A lot of times I do this kind of thing based on if I want to hide or show something as well. It really depends. Typically, you'll see me using classes, but every once in a while I'll sneak in and I'll do an inline style, and this is an example of that here. Notice that when we're doing this in JSX, we do not use dashes. Everything is camel case. All right, let's go ahead and put our avatar together here as well. Now, we're going to basically have our avatar being wrapped within the Jumbotron. And we'll be doing a little bit of maneuvering to make sure it looks the way we want to later on in our style sheet. But here you'll see that the avatar is going to be a background image that we're going to bring in via inline style JavaScript. It's going to be very similar to what we just did a minute ago for our banner. And this will be our PHP is very small. It's our API that we're going to be calling for the feeds. So wherever the XML is, we send that address to this, basically this script, and it grabs the XML and runs a loop through it and builds out the object that we can send to this application. So the PHP is something I learned a long time ago. It's a really easy way to grab RSS feeds, and so which case I've always used it. I mean, granted, you're going to have like something that works with PHP or possibly Linux running, but a lot of times I'll build my applications and then the APIs will be somewhere else where it's more the environment I want. It just depends. When you see how easy it is to write this in PHP, you'll be blown away. So as you can see here, I've got all my headers, and then I say q equals get q, is which I sent. Now that's going to be the XML document. Here we go. Now we just go through the loops, and if you're any familiar with XML, they've got a title, they got a link, they got a description, a publish date, and the GUID. These are all things that come with it in Node, little kind of nodes. And you can gather them, and then you push them to an array, like in an object, and then you send them back, and this is the result. So basically, any XML RSS feed you want to send me, if this PHP is just going to generate it and send it back the way that you saw it. Now, you can even use it for podcasts, which I think is pretty cool too. All right. Now, this might not sound like much, but filtering feeds is a really big deal here, because what we want them to do, the user, is to click on or type in words they don't want to hear about, that they've just heard way too much of the topic, and then they submit that word. This combs through everything looking for that word, whether it's in the content or the title, and if it finds it, it takes that story out. So if you've just had it with, I don't know, whatever topic, type that topic in there and you'll never hear about it. It'll filter through here. I mean, we'll go ahead and build out this XML here, and you'll see how useful it is. I mean, sometimes, the news just hammers stuff too much. You just want to get away from it. And we're just going to build out our standard export here. And then this is going to be the loaded for our use effect. So we just want it to run once, so then I switch it to true once it's loaded one time, and then it won't run again. It's very typical. We'll be using Axios, so let's bring that dependency in as well. And make sure that filter feeds is represented. And with everything we need, it looks like we're going to need config. So let's copy the config and swing it in so we don't have to write it again in the filter feeds module. Okay, so let's get the APIs running here. This is the client side. I always suggest that, because they're so similar, to just put some kind of a, say, you're on the client side right now, so you don't destroy something. It's our standard get. Now there's an interesting thing about our get list. If it's empty, we have like a default phrase that it tells you, hey, by the way, this is empty. You'll see as we come in here, it's not anything really big. It's just that we have that so that for the most part, we're not really, we always have something there. We just want to make sure it's listed. If it says the default, it just won't run through it. So being that we're using split, because as it came in, as you remember, everything that we've been saving, none of that stuff's a real object that's in the SQL Server. It's just, we've turned it to a string. So here, I'm going to tell it to find out if there's any commas, and if so, go ahead and split them there. So we're going to create remove list is going to be split up into an array, and then we trim. We use the method trim to basically take off any empty spaces. And then from here, we're going to set that list. And now, granted, this application is, this function actually is coming in from the main content, and so we've passed it on through props. But it works the same. It doesn't really matter. I mean, you can pass on variables, functions, you name it. So, and let's just do our error concept just in case. Everything's got to be spelled right. All right, let's do our update. And since we're always going to have something represented, even as default, a lot of times this is going to be updating, getting, and then deleting. Like posting something, I mean, that more means that there was nothing there in the first place, and we started with something. So a lot of times you won't see me do post because it had a default in the first place, so we're just going to be updating. Very common. And this would be what the remove input field is going to be named field. So I don't have to keep writing it over and over again. So it wants to make sure that there's a value in field, and that's what I'm referring to. If there's no value in field, then we're going to be doing a put. I'm sorry, if there is a value in field, we're doing a put. I'm just combining things here. It'll be based on our values. So we'll take our list and send it to a string and make sure that they send out the email. All right, so if it does have something in the remove field, this is where we're going. And then we're going to clear out the remove field. to me, it looks like we're missing something here. I think later on I come back and fix this, because right now we're just passing on the list. So I think I actually come back around and fix this later. Yeah, we're just setting the list currently. One thing I do want to point out when I'm done with all these is just because right now I'm currently just copying stuff, and I've clearly missed something here. I need to basically add this new field information into the current list, and then I need to go ahead and start sending it off and setting it. So all this actually happens when I'm done copying from my original, and you'll see me go through and find the error and then fix them. All right, let's head on to the next portion here. So for the delete word, we're going to pass through the word that was selected. And by doing that, it's basically when a user hits the X on the button of the word, it will basically fire off, it'll pass on the word. And I'm going to build a temp data array. It's just an empty box, an empty array. And we're going to compare each word that's in the list of the remove list. And if they don't match what was passed on for the delete word, then it goes and it gets pushed into the temp data. If it does match, it does not get pushed into the temp data. And therefore, when we're done, we'll be excluding that one word, and everything else will go back in and be sent. So as you can see, we're doing an old school push here just to build back up temp data to resemble our remove list minus the one word selected. And then once we've made sure that there is something in temp data and it's not empty, we'll go ahead and send this off. One of the things, though, if temp data is empty, is I need to basically make it, it's misspelled right now, but it will need to be temp data empty, which is the default, which we'll be looking for. If it says temp data empty, we'll know that, and that's our default. And it won't be represented in our list. And there we go. That's how we would delete the word with our update remove list. We just send temp data right over there. Now let's write the JSX for this module. And as I said before, we want to make sure that loaded is false. And then when we run this one time, it'll set to true. And then this won't run anymore. It won't meet the curriculum, so it won't run again. So we'll only fire off get remove list one time on load. I think there's a better way to do use effect. I'm just not really 100% sure how, and this works, so I use it. But if I'm not mistaken, you can also use like a comma and tell it which ones you would like to fire off at the end, kind of like a set timeout, lets you explain a little more detail about how much time you want to wait. This also does things like that too, but I found that to be kind of inefficient, and I guess I'm using it wrong, but I know this works, so that's why you use the set loaded. And I'm just going to build out my input field. This is just I'd like to be able to go ahead and input here what what word I don't want to hear about. And this is going to be wrapped because I'm using an input group. So this button at the end, think of it kind of like a Google search input field. And at the end, there's going to be a button that fits with your input field. This is kind of a wrap that Bootstrap offers, so that it looks like one unit, the input field and button at the end. And here is going to be me firing off update remove list. And this here is going to be displaying our buttons. So if we have any items that want to be removed, it's going to be displayed here in the form of a button with an X on it. And every time you add a word, a new button will show up with it being represented and an X next to it. And then obviously if you click the X, it deletes the word from your remove list. And let's go ahead and I've got a class. I'm basically building my line items in line. It's just something basic that I've done within the class style sheet, and it says inline block. And so anything that says inline, the UL will have the line items, and then this class basically has them go inline. And you can do that with divs or anything else. I mean, sometimes you don't want to have them traditionally on top of each other. You want to have them horizontally laid out. So we'll start doing our map. Go through our remove list, represent the word that's being spat out in the array, and of course the iteration with an I. And as long as it doesn't equal our temp data empty, which is our default, we'll be listing this. And here's our line item that's going to be returned. And within the line item is going to be a button. And these buttons will just line up next to each other as much as they can, and then they'll actually stack. So that's kind of how inline is going to work for us. And let's go clean this up so it's more legible. And let's get something in there so we can read it. And let's say what word exactly is it we're dealing with. And here I'm going to put our little trash can. It's actually just a little circle with an X in it. And that way we know to click that, and it will delete the word. And here I'm just going to put a number of how many stories or posts are being hidden, so that you're kind of aware of what we're up to. How many things are being hidden from you during your reading. Now let's go ahead and build our network. So the network is your pals and your friends that you've decided to follow. It's just a list of emails. When I go out and start selecting these emails individually, then I start getting what RSS feeds they're searching for and they've saved. But the network in particular is literally just a list of my friends. Anybody I'm following. And once again, I'm doing my use effect load false set to true, so it only runs one time. It's very repetitive stuff here. Strangely enough, I don't feel like writing software is that complicated. It's coming up with ideas that it's somewhat uniquely, tough, especially ones that haven't been in existence just yet. So you'll see me as we're writing through, and all this technically looks the same. There's not a lot of, you can make writing code very complicated and tough to read, and I see people do it all the time, and they seem to over-engineer things. And then there's always those rules that say, keep it simple, stupid. And ultimately, if you just write code that's super easy to read and don't make it complicated, you'll just end up doing the same thing over and over again, because that's all code's really doing, is just going through lists. Here especially, you tell it a list, and you tell it to modify this list, or you tell it not to modify the list, or you tell it to, that's pretty much it. The network, it's the list of my emails, the people I follow. and I can delete people and add people. That's pretty much it. Bringing in messages, it's just a list of messages, and that's the whole thing. So if you really want to dumb down what most software is doing, is just going through a list of things, of data. And that's what they're really, really good at. It's not that complicated. So as the data comes in, it's ultimately called, like, it has brackets and it says data, and then it has another object embedded in that. So to get it, luckily I've spelled network wrong, but I'll go into the data first and then get the object that the data is holding within. It's confusing, but this is a good way to get through and manipulate it. Now you can do that on the other side too before it gets to you. And I argue that that's what a lot of times you'll see, like GraphQL and stuff like that. They'll start, they want to kind of break down the object before it actually makes it out across. And I do think that that's not a bad idea. That way you're not sending as much data as you wanted to. In this case, there's not a lot of extra data I'll be sending. But if you really want to shrink down the amount of information you're transferring out, you can make this manipulation on the server side, and say, now we'll go ahead and just get what data is representing embedded, as opposed to the whole thing. So you really don't even need GraphQL. You could just do this on your own and refine all your API calls to just get the smallest amount of data possible. So that's my theory on the things that people build libraries for that you could easily just do yourself. Okay, so client side, updating network list. As you can see on the server side, we've got to make sure that all of our paths are the same. Now I prefer to use check token here. Just a really simple thing we already have in place to make sure that just the one logging in is the only one that can get this stuff. And we'll just pass that same concept down on the client side, so it fires off our token. All right, so we'll pass through the network list, to the function. And we're going through and saying, if show does not equal remove user, then validate. And then we're going to go through our validate and ask it to validate the field named follow. If validate finds an error, it's going to add, if validate has something wrong with it, if it doesn't have anything in the field, my validate functionality just added the class error to it. And so, which case, if in fact there is an error, I just stop this whole thing and we don't move any further. And otherwise, I'm now going to determine that the variable field, since we have determined that it does have a value within the field, that is now going to be defined as the variable field. So we've told it if it did have an error and it was empty, we would have stopped it. Otherwise, we're moving forward, and that is now our value. So we're just going to verify, and then we start pushing our field value into the list. And just kind of playing it safe with this list to make sure it really has something that we're going to bother with. And if it does, we're going to go update our network. And with it, we're going to be utilizing Axios. And let's go ahead and put our object together. that we'll be sending out. Now, like always, we can't send it in an array. We didn't tell it was going to be a array. We told it was going to be characters. So we need to take that list and turn it into a string using this toString method. We got to obviously send out our email so it knows who exactly we would like to save this new string to. And then we're going to check for our token. Obviously, we need to make these modules just need to pass config down so it knows what we're talking about. Now, we also, once this is all successful, let's go ahead and clear out the follow field so that it knows, oh, that worked. So then we'll just take the values they've typed in that field and get rid of them. So it'll be ready to do again. And there's a lot of functionality that we're firing off if it's successful. Quite a few things going on. And obviously, if we have an error, we need to see what happened. Trust me, at the end of this, when I'm done going through all the stuff that I've just copied, those errors are going to come in handy. All right, and here we're going to do the deleting of the user through the same concepts as earlier for our client side. And so we'll be doing a very similar thing. We've got an empty array called temp data. We're going to go through all of our network list, as long as the network list has at least somebody in it. And then if the network list in this iteration equals the network user we're trying to delete, then they shall not be pushed into temp data. Anybody else that does not equal who we selected is going to get pushed into temp data within each iteration one at a time. And then we just take that temp data and fire it off. That's our new list. We just left out the individual that was told we didn't want them. All right, let's just build the network JSX, or some people, it's basically your HTML within your JavaScript. I think TypeScript is another option for this, but I'm not using it. And it looks like I've got a misspelling, but we'll, like I said, get back in here and set loaded to true. Yeah, I see what we'll be back here to fix that. But let's get our JSX put together, and we also need to export the file. So any number of problems here. Okay, so an interesting thing about this feed network, I'm going to basically be listing everyone that is in our feed network. Now, I'm also going to have something that toggles. So I can toggle from viewing your feed network and selecting the members of your network to see what they follow. And there's going to be another option that's going to be in edit mode for your network. And if we're in edit mode, as opposed to selecting them to view their following feeds, will be the option to delete them. And it's just a toggle back and forth to view or to delete members of your network. So the leave edit mode would only be showing if we're trying to remove user. So there's a state that says if remove user is available, then we'll be toggling back and forth between these two buttons. And there we go. And that will toggle us between the two options of removing or viewing. And now here, based on that toggle, you will see the result. There we go. Now these list groups, there are many options. If you're familiar with Bootstrap, this is the button option, which goes well if you're doing like an on-click, things like that. Sometimes the href, anchor tags, things like that come in handy too. So the list group in Bootstrap also represents not only buttons, but they have line items, and then they have, hrefs. So you'll be able to utilize them for whatever they're better for. Coincidentally, buttons are pretty helpful in this scenario. And let's go ahead and represent the individual email. And that load list would be if we would like to see what they are following. Interesting. Forget what I'm actually doing here, because we need to have a list group, because this is based on class. Okay, good, better. And yeah, user wouldn't make sense here. We are looking more for a class. There we go. So if show does not equal remove user, we're going to be displaying these in a regular fashion, and if they're selected, we will see this user in particular's feed, everything they follow. Let's clean this up so I can make some sense of it. Now, if show actually does equal remove user, now there's a couple of different ways to write this ternary operator. You could shrink this code block down if you wanted to. Instead of null, you could do this the other way. Doesn't really matter too much because it's only one word we'd be replacing. But ideally, yeah, you could just do that. But if it does equal remove user, then we're going to be mapping out the same exact elements in our list, so that we can select them not to view what they like, but to remove them from our list. And so that's how we toggle between the two lists within our network feature. And let's just go ahead and bring over the class ternary operator for the class, because it's going to be the same thing. So we can tell who's been active and actively selected. Really handy ternary operator for the classes. And just move this up and get ready to write in our function on click. And if you're familiar with my other work, first we're going to make sure that they're very sure they want to delete this individual. So in reality, they're only going to be popping up a warning box, which you may be familiar with most of our other tutorials, where I will confirm yes or no, do you really want to get rid of this individual? Because there's so many times when you can accidentally hit your keypad, or it's just you were working too fast, or like your cat fell on your keypad or something. So it's going to be one of those things where you're better off asking, are you sure? And frankly, if you've ever worked in any kind of larger company, if you don't do this, someone's going to come along and tell you to. I mean, you can hang back and wait for them, or just get it done. And then here will be our warning box to confirm. An alert box. There we go. And just write out what Bootstrap is required for this alert box. Not your traditional alert box that pops up, mind you, because today's browsers wouldn't let you see that, a pop-up window. This is just a div that hides and shows. And it's a class of alert, has some coloring and a little bit of class and styling to it, thanks to Bootstrap. And then here's our confirmation of delete user. The other one was just going to get rid of the actual box, and we'll move on. So no, we'll just close this box. Yes goes much further. See, we'll just set the warning back to nothing. Which is also, when you use delete user, you'll see eventually that will come into play as well. And here we're going to have an input field where I'm actually going to have the availability, but this is where they would type in who they would like to follow. So if they want to add somebody to their network, this is where this plays in. Similar to the same design as the input field group, where you have an input field, and then at the end of it to the right will be the button, similar to like a Google search or something. So it looks like your input field and button are one. Nicely done by Bootstrap. I've tried it myself. It's a pain in the butt. So I just stick with what they've written. I'm super glad that they've done it for us, because we can work way faster than trying to figure it out in CSS. I don't know why anybody would want to create the wheel now that we have CSS libraries. I mean, obviously, there's other ones. I mean, Materialize is one I've used. Foundation is another one. Bootstraps is the one I started with, but based on where you work, you never really know what they do. So luckily, they are all kind of the same. Some have more functionality in JavaScript. I don't ever use the Bootstrap JavaScript. It's jQuery. It's totally outdated, and you have to read up a lot of documentation to work with it, and I'd much rather prefer just use mine. Okay, so save theme is something very easily done. We're utilizing Bootswatch's themes, so all I really need to do is get a list of them. And Bootstrap's more than happy to hand that out. And then I go to the CSS Bootstrap that I'm utilizing here on my index page, and I make an identifier, and I make sure that every time I select a Bootstrap from my dropdown, a Bootstrap theme from my dropdown, it updates the href for that link, the CSS link. In which case, also, I'll be storing it in my local storage, so when I load back up, it'll remember what Bootstrap theme I saved last time. And as you can see, here is my identifier for the query selector on my index page. Now, that's in my public folder. You're going to find the index.html, and this is up at the top in the header is where we'll be identifying and swapping out our theme. And here, as you see, we're just another part of the same process. Now, themes list is going to be something that's going to be, it's just an array, right? Themes list, plural. And if I'm not mistaken, I just copied it in here. Yeah, well, I guess I'll do it later. Make sure it's all spelled right. Oh, and I'll also save this. So it's not only, it's saved to your user table in SQL. So in case it's not saved to your local, SQL will send back whatever you selected last time. Yeah, I think I actually take this part out. This is a something we have written somewhere else, so I'm pretty sure I swing by later and just pass this on, but you never know. It's so small of a object that it calls the same thing. I wouldn't recommend writing it more than once, especially when you have a semicolon instead of a comma. But we will see what I do in the future. I wrote this stuff, and eventually, I don't know if you have ever had to copy pages and pages of this stuff and not go check the results, but your head gets a little light, just copying and copying and copying, and you stop seeing errors, and you just trying to get finished. So the latter part of this whole lessons, all these lessons put together, is me fixing these errors that you see me creating over and over again, and that does get entertaining, looking at all the mistakes I've made. So the change theme, we're going to ask it which theme you're talking about. I'm using query selector, that's why I have a hash in there. If I used get element by ID, I would not have a £. But let's go ahead and get our Axios set. Now Axios has a default, so coincidentally we're never posting anything, we're always doing a put. And we're going to tell it which one we stored, and then we're going to be sending that out. And also we have the email stored in local storage too, so might as well just send that. Now personally, I wouldn't do the session get item. I would pass the actual user email through the props, which I could probably do later on if I haven't done it already. I mean, if I changed it in the session storage, that means that I could change anybody's. I could just, anybody who has an account I could go in and into my session storage, change my email to whoever else's, save it, and then it would ultimately save that individual's theme to something else. So you see the flaw here? So I wouldn't always try to do things within the realm of your application as opposed to, let's say, something that the user can see and change, like something on the interface they can manipulate. Don't utilize that. Don't try not to utilize things that are in your local session storage that can be changed too. Go through the actual code and use the values that you're working with, not things you've saved that are accessible to your user. That's probably better advice, and you clearly see that where the flaw is in this here. And here we're going to have our default, where my defaulted Bootstrap is saved. So if they don't choose anything, it'll just have this. And that's what's already defaulted into the field, the value, the href value, in the header as well. Now let's just go ahead and have the map through of the theme list. And standard going through iterations, representing a key for indexing for React. And let's go ahead and write in what the theme is based on this iteration. Your simple map. And then further what we're viewing, I'm only going to cut it off at the last index of the slash. No reason to keep the whole extension or the whole file path going. We just need the name of the theme here, just not within the value, but within what the user can see. And let's go ahead and wrap this. And obviously we don't have a list, so let's get that. And once again, I would love to thank Bootswatch for creating these themes. And you don't have to use Bootswatches if you don't want. You can make your own themes through a theme roller if you have to hit a certain mark. But this is the most handy for me as of recently. And they also have Bootstrap 5 currently, so you don't have to use 4 anymore if you'd like to. And that's it for this lesson, and we'll be moving on, and see you soon.